Our next scripture reading comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verses 2 through 15. Setting out, that was verse 1. We didn't have to read verse 1. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you've brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death." The Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them to see whether they'll follow my instructions or not. But on the sixth day, when they apportion what they brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "By evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us? Since it is the Lord." Moses continued, "Who will give you flesh to eat in the evening, and bread in the morning to the full? Because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling." And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence of the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, "I have heard the grumblings of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. You shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, "That is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat. An omer to that stopped, didn't it? I just want to read the whole Bible to you today. Yeah, you're right. There is no more pages there. When he said, "That is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. The grass withers, flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever." And this is the word of the Lord, and all thanks be to God. The bread that the Lord has given us to eat. But what is it? The Israelites wanted to know that. It wasn't something they recognized, wasn't something they ever seen before. It came to them in mysterious ways, and sure, they saw a cloud and they saw fog, but they only really knew that Moses was saying this was from God. And God heard their grumbling. God heard their complaining. God had compassion for them, as Moses said. You know, they were at a very rough stage in their journey at this point. So, thank you for pausing in this Exodus journey that we've been taking together as we were going through Genesis before this, as Reverend Livingston took over for me up here last week. This is a rough stage in my journey, as you all know, and have just lost my brother. Your compassion for us, for me and all my family, has been incredible throughout this process. And now as we take another step forward together, That is a powerful way that God soothes us. God gives us comfort and strength and understanding and so much more, all through compassion. Through compassion, God is able to give us a peace that we're needing and searching for and grasping for in our hearts. God, feeling the compassion for the Israelites, as we see in the scripture, came up with quite a divine menu, some heavenly food for the Israelites, for breakfast and dinner, to keep the Israelites fed, to keep them from running out of gas on this long journey that they had ahead of them. Now, we pick on the Israelites. A lot of us do, or at least I do. I know for like whining and complaining too much. Seems like all they're doing, they whine and complain in the wilderness and they're grumbling. But really, it didn't look good for them out there. Didn't look good at all. All they had to go on was that they'd been taught that that was God that saved them from Egypt and that miraculous thing that happened. And all they saw in front of them was a harsh, empty desert. I was going to talk about that deliverance more last week, the big climax of the Moses story, the Exodus story. Take some time to read that if you get a chance. Brush up on it, Exodus chapter 14. Freshen up on them crossing the sea into freedom. After all the plagues, after the Passover, the Israelites went in a hurry. And they reached the Sea of Reeds, Red Sea, whatever it's technically the Sea of Reeds in Scripture, so we're not totally sure, but whatever body of water it was, they found themselves up against it and trapped. Pharaoh and his army caught up to them and cornered them by the water. But God, the presence of God, shielded them from behind and went before them and pushed back the waters all night until they became dry ground for the people to walk across. God then released the waters to close in around Pharaoh and his army, and the Israelites were free. The Israelites sang and they danced of a great deliverance. Come to find out, that's still just the beginning of the story. Now, the desert. It's a new beginning, albeit not a very pleasant one from their point of view, as they were starting to feel their first real hunger pains out there in the desert. It was about a month into the journey, so they've already been going quite a ways. Now, I don't know about you, but I get a headache when I don't eat. I feel weak, I feel crummy, and add to that walking across the desert, carrying whatever you got, helping each other over this rugged terrain, step by step, quickly getting dehydrated. They didn't know where they were going. If they happened to cross a town or a city or something, they couldn't just go there. There was too many of them. That wouldn't be good for anybody. What in the world were they going to do? Men, women, and children, all they knew, all they inherited was 400 years of slavery. And now an empty, harsh desert in front of them. What they had before was awful. But at least it was something, right? They still had food to eat. All they had here in that desert was remembering how they got out of Egypt and a whole lot of trust. And all that trust didn't feel like it was going to hold up anymore. The people were grasping for something. They were grumbling, they were complaining, they were expressing the hopelessness that it looked like Moses and Aaron just marched them right into. One might see some of this kind of response, some of this behavior in a lot of us today. Perhaps in these COVID times, among everything else going on in the world, perhaps a lot of us are grasping for something ourselves. We're grumbling a lot these days, on every side. We're taking our sides, we're pointing fingers, and everything is the other group or person's fault or whoever. We end up sounding just like our politicians these days, fighting their battles, the liberal conservative battles that we start fighting amongst ourselves online or on phone calls, around dinner tables, or wherever else. And we've got legitimate reasons to grumble, to complain. A pandemic that's taken lives, leaving a long-lasting effect. Racism that still takes lives. Leaves long-lasting effects. Anger adds to anger, adds to anger. And we just take sides with each other, against each other, and just want to duke it out instead of working together. It's only natural for us to take sides and point our fingers when we are upset. That's a lot easier than working together. We certainly haven't figured all this out yet, whereas we just fall into the same behavior patterns that they did, the Israelites. So it seems kind of silly to pick on them for their whining and complaining. You know, we got to point the finger at somebody, right? It's what we do. Point some blame, redirect some attention away from ourselves so we don't look like we're guilty in any of the problem. We've got to figure out whose fault it is. That always makes things better. Figure out whose fault it is. Thankfully, instead of arguing back and forth with the Israelites, Moses and Aaron, they chose not to make the problem worse by engaging in that grumbling and complaining that the Israelites were doing. Moses and Aaron went to the Lord about it. Went to the people. It was like, just talk to the Lord. The Lord let us all out of here. And then God showed the way. God was already feeling compassion for them, already leading up to this point as they're starting to feel those hunger pains, that they're starting to get upset and starting to grumble. God is already feeling compassion for them. God knew that the Israelites were grasping for something because they were in a rough spot. Acting out because of their hunger pains, how tired they were, dehydration. Moses and Aaron, it just seemed to be all their fault. It's all your guys' fault. You let us out here to die. But God understood where those people were coming from. God didn't hold it against them for getting angry in a tough spot like that. Instead, God fed them. This food God gave them from heaven. What is it? What in the world? Manna. Not really known for much anything else but from this story. This bread from heaven that God provides. This daily bread. The morning when the fog lifted, this flaky substance, it became their bread. I don't know what they did with it to make it bread, or if they just ate it as it was. But they had more than enough of it. They got just enough for every day. And then on the sixth day, they got twice as much so that they could have enough for the next day and not have to work on the Sabbath to make it happen. Then quail at night. Same thing. Plenty of meat. Plenty to go around. Plenty for everybody. It was good for the moment. Good for the day. But then they weren't able to save it. They were told, don't store it up. Don't take extra. Don't try to take control of this situation and think that you can fix it yourself. This situation is all built around trust. Heavenly bread and quail. All they could eat buffet of heavenly bread and quail. This divine menu. But they've got to keep trusting God. This, of course, if you know the rest of the story, it's only the beginning of this wrestling, because right away a bunch of the Israelites didn't really trust that much, and it's kind of hard to blame them knowing the rough spot they were in, and so they were going to try to store up more for themselves, take control of the situation, have some extra, and it went bad. So they couldn't do that. They just had to trust. So this food that God gives us from heaven, and just as they were wondering about it then, what is this? We might ask the same question today. Because God still gives us food from heaven every day, and it's something we just got to trust, and it's not anything we can gather up and take extra of, and it's just something that every single day we've got to trust in God to give. We're in a very different situation, so we're not talking about a flaky substance that shows up in the morning after the dew rise or after the fog rises. We're not talking about dead birds ready to throw on a grill. But what we receive does fill our gas tanks for the journey. It does give us what we need to march forward together as God's people through even the most empty and harsh deserts. Perhaps to see what it is God gives us for food from heaven, we need to see what it was that was really feeding the Israelites at the time. We've got the bread and the quail, they had food in their stomachs, but what was it that was really feeding them? What really fed them, what really fed their gas tanks in the desert, was much more than manna and quail. It was God's compassion. Like the Israelites, we look back, we celebrate our deliverance from evil, our salvation, the miraculous things that God has done. Those special memories drive us forward. We remember what God has done for us. Those are very important memories as we look forward further into the desert. Now, we are at a rough stage in our journey, collectively, a lot of us individually. Instead of all the grumbling and taking sides and placing blame, maybe that daily food from heaven God is still providing today can lead us in a better direction. We've got all kinds of ideas on how to fix the world's problems right now, and we don't hesitate to let each other know about it. I wonder how many of those ideas have been inspired by God's compassion. And I wonder how many of us are ready to share that heavenly food that the Lord gives with the people around us.